When my stepbrother locked his arm around my 17-year-old sister's neck on our home gym mat, he thought he was proving a point. She tapped his arm frantically, gasping for air, but he just smirked, tightened his grip and roared, "Cry like a little girl. Let's see who saves you now." My stepmother stood in the doorway, folding her arms with a smug grin, completely amused. They thought they were dealing with two helpless young women. They forgot one tiny detail. I spent 6 years in elite military combat instruction, and I didn't raise my voice or scream. I didn't panic. I walked over to the heavy glass doors, turned the deadbolt and locked them from the inside. When I turned around and dropped my jacket, revealing my uniform dress shirt, my stepbrother's smug smile vanished. Within 9 seconds he was the one begging for air, and I whispered, "Meet your real nightmare. My name is Claire Vance. I'm 27 years old, and if you saw me walking down the street in plain clothes, you'd probably assume I work a standard desk job." What I kept to myself, especially around my new family, was that I had spent the last 6 years as an elite military combat instructor. I was trained to dismantle threats quietly, efficiently, and without breaking a sweat. But when I returned home to transition back into civilian life, I chose to keep my background quiet. I didn't feel the need to boast about my credentials. Unfortunately, my father's new wife, Brenda, took my quiet demeanor as a sign of weakness. 6 months ago, my father married Brenda, and she immediately brought her 23-year-old son, Chad, into our home. From day one, the energy shifted. Chad was a self-proclaimed martial arts champion who wore his ego like a badge of honor. He walked around the house like he owned the place, constantly flexing his muscles, talking down to everyone and trying to establish himself as the dominant alpha in the household. While I spent my time settling back in and staying out of their way, Chad found a much easier target for his arrogance. My 17-year-old sister, Maya. Maya was soft-spoken, kind, and completely non-confrontational. Brenda and Chad treated our home like their personal domain, constantly pushing Maya into a subservient role and making subtle, cruel comments about her lack of strength. Brenda encouraged every bit of it, smiling proudly whenever Chad asserted himself. They genuinely believed they were the top predators in this house, completely unaware of who was actually sitting across from them at the dinner table. It didn't take long for Chad to turn our detached garage into his personal sparring gym. He filled the space with heavy bags, matting and trophies he'd allegedly won, turning it into a monument to his own ego. But bag work wasn't enough for him. Soon he began pressuring Maya into training sessions. He claimed he was just teaching her basic self-defense, but it was obvious to anyone paying attention that he was using her as a human punching bag to flex his physical dominance. Maya, being gentle and eager to keep the peace for our father's sake, reluctantly agreed to step onto those mats. The tension in the house reached a boiling point on a hot Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the back patio when I heard raised, aggressive voices echoing from the garage gym. I stood up and walked toward the building, the air growing heavier with every step. Through the open side door, I saw Brenda leaning against the wall, her arms folded across her chest with a cruel, satisfied smirk on her face. On the center of the mat, Chad had Maya pinned to the floor in a tight, dangerous rear-naked chokehold. Maya's face was turning beet red. Her small hands were frantically slapping at his thick arm, desperately tapping out, the universal signal in any martial art that a hold must be released immediately. Chad didn't let go. Instead, his grip tightened, cutting off her throat. He leaned down right next to her ear, his voice dripping with sadistic joy, and roared, "Cry like a little girl. Let's see who saves you now." Brenda didn't intervene. She just chuckled, thoroughly entertained by her son's display of power. Most people in that situation would scream, panic, or rush forward in a chaotic rage. But 6 years in high-stakes military combat training teaches you something fundamental. Anger is noise and panic is fatal. Calmness is lethal. As Maya's desperate gasps filled the air, a cool, icy focus settled over me. My pulse didn't spike. My heart rate actually slowed down as my muscle memory kicked in. I didn't yell at Chad to stop. I didn't plead with Brenda. I simply stepped into the gym, my sneakers making no sound on the concrete floor. Brenda glanced over at me, her eyes flashing with smug amusement, expecting me to cry out or beg her son to take mercy on my sister. Instead, I walked right past her toward the entrance. I reached for the heavy, reinforced glass doors that sealed the gym off from the backyard. I pulled them shut. Then, with a slow, deliberate twist of my wrist, I turned the heavy deadbolt until it clicked firmly into place. The sharp sound echoed through the silent room, effectively trapping everyone inside and cutting off any chance of escape. Brenda's smirk flickered for a fraction of a second, confusion replacing her arrogance. I turned back around and unzipped my casual gray hoodie. I slipped it off my shoulders and tossed it aside onto a bench. Underneath, I was wearing my dark tactical military undershirt, complete with my unit's official insignia and instructor patch pinned over my chest. The atmospheric shift in the room was instantaneous. The careless girl they thought they could intimidate was gone, replaced by a seasoned instructor who had trained elite soldiers for real combat. The sudden click of the lock finally got Chad's attention. He loosened his grip on Maya just enough for her to break free, coughing violently as she scrambled toward the corner of the room. Chad stood up slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead, an arrogant grin returning to his face. He looked at my military shirt and let out a harsh, condescending laugh. "What's this supposed to be? Costume day?" he mocked, cracking his knuckles as he took a heavy step toward me. "You think a little badge makes you tough, little girl?" He lunged forward, throwing a broad, wild right hook aimed straight for my jaw, intending to end it in one dramatic punch. He had no idea who he was dealing with. To an amateur, his move was aggressive. To a tactical instructor, it was slow, predictable, and full of openings. I didn't flinch. As his fist closed in, I slid inside his guard, stepping past his momentum. In one fluid, practiced movement, I caught his wrist, twisted his arm back against the joint, and drove my knee into his torso to completely break his posture. Before he could even register the pain, I swept his front leg out from under him. Chad hit the mat with a deafening thud, the wind completely knocked out of his lungs. Before he could recover, I dropped my weight onto his upper back, pinning his shoulder to the floor and locking his arm in a joint lock that rendered him entirely helpless. Total elapsed time: 9 seconds. Chad squirmed and thrashing desperately, but my leverage was absolute. I leaned down until my lips were inches from his ear. "Meet your real nightmare," I whispered, my voice cold as ice. The arrogance drained from his face instantly, replaced by sheer panic as he began gasping and begging for air. The smug satisfaction that had been painted across Brenda's face for months shattered into absolute terror. She stared at her son, her unstoppable prize-winning champion, pinned flat on the floor, gasping like a fish out of water. For a second, her brain couldn't process what had just happened. Then panic set in. She lunged toward the heavy glass doors, rattling the handle furiously, but the deadbolt held firm. "Let us out," she shrieked, her voice cracking as she whipped around to glare at me. She scrambled through her purse with trembling hands and pulled out her phone. "You're insane. I'm calling the police right now. You assaulted my son. They're going to lock you away for years." I didn't lose my cool. I kept my knee pressed firmly into Chad's shoulder blade, holding him immobile while keeping my eyes fixed on Brenda. "Go ahead, Brenda," I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. "Call them. But before you dial, take a look right above your head." She paused, her thumb hovering over the screen, and slowly looked up. Mounted in the top corner of the garage gym was a high-definition security camera, its small red light blinking steadily. "That camera records audio and video 24/7 directly to a cloud server," I continued. "It just captured Chad ignoring Maya's physical and verbal tap-outs, placing a minor in a dangerous, illegal chokehold and screaming threats at her. It also caught you cheering him on. So please call the police. I'd love to show them the footage." Brenda's phone slipped in her hand. Her face went pale as the full legal reality of their actions hit her. The empty threats were useless and she knew it. Brenda lowered her phone, her chest heaving as she stared at the blinking red light of the security camera. I released Chad, standing up smoothly and stepping back. He immediately rolled onto his side, coughing and clutching his shoulder, completely stripped of the bravado he'd paraded around our home for 6 months. "You think you're both so clever," I said, looking between Brenda and her groveling son. "Did you really think I wouldn't look into who you actually were before letting you near my sister?" I walked over to my gym bag, pulled out a manila folder and tossed it onto the mat in front of Chad. "You're no champion, Chad," I revealed, my voice cutting through the quiet room. "I did a background check 2 weeks ago. You were kicked out of your last 2 martial arts academies for unsportsmanlike conduct, dangerous aggression, and staging fake tournament wins for social media. You're a fraud who targets people smaller than you because real fighters see right through you. Chad stared at the documents, his face flushed with humiliation. Brenda opened her mouth to defend him, but I cut her off before she could speak. Here's how this goes, I said, stepping toward the locked doors and unlocking them with a heavy turn of the latch. You two are going to pack your bags and be out of my father's house by midnight. If you try to fight this, or if either of you ever come near Maya again, this video footage along with these background records goes straight to the district attorney and the local press. Brenda looked at Chad, who was still trembling on the mat, completely defeated. Without saying another word, she grabbed her son by the arm and together they slunk out of the gym. By the time my father returned from his business trip late that evening, the house was completely silent. Brenda and Chad were already long gone, having packed their belongings in a desperate panic to avoid legal trouble. I sat down with my father in the living room and played the unedited security footage from the garage gym. As he watched Chad mistreat Maya and heard Brenda's cruel laughter, his face transformed from confusion to deep, quiet anger. He didn't hesitate for a second. The very next morning he contacted his lawyer and officially initiated divorce proceedings against Brenda, ensuring she would never step foot on our property again. With the toxicity purged from our home, the atmosphere completely transformed. Maya, who had spent months walking on eggshells and hiding in her room, finally began to smile again. The physical bruises on her neck healed within days, but I knew the emotional scars would take longer. To help her regain her confidence, I started taking her down to the garage gym every afternoon. But this time it wasn't about dominance or cruelty, it was about genuine empowerment. I taught her real, practical self-defense rooted in technique, leverage, and self-respect. Watching her transform from a fearful teenager into a confident, strong young woman has been the most rewarding mission of my life. Looking back, Chad thought he was stepping onto those mats to crush someone weaker than him. He never realized that true strength doesn't need to brag, bully, or exert fake power. Real strength exists to protect the people you love. And sometimes, it shows up when you least expect it.